Literally just got like the first 3 sentences. So
That's to keep everybody distracted. Well, good morning, everybody. All right, we'll be picking up where we left off. We'll be in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 12. Does anybody have any questions or comments on what we read before since we had our last getting together? Does anybody remember anything? Let's look back at chapter 6 real quick before we continue on, because chapter 7, I think we're starting to get in where we're at in chapter 7. Let's talk about more about obedience. But here we're talking about his greatest commandment in chapter 6, which we all know is, do y'all remember? Does anybody want to say anything? What was the greatest commandment in chapter 6?
serve the Lord.
Yeah, with all your heart. There you go. There you go. That was the main point on that one in chapter 6. But then also there's a caution about disobedience, which we all know what was there was consequences for their actions. They were held accountable for what they did, and even Moses was not spared from that, because God, he's going to treat everybody equally. Even though, yeah, Moses did a lot of work for him, but God was quite clear that, hey, look, you're going to be accountable for what you did. Even though he told Moses directly to speak to this rock, Moses struck it. Lord still blessed him with the water, but he's like, you didn't do what I asked you to, Moses. Now you can't go. And so on and so forth. So that was what he's talking about, is a caution against disobedience. And here and there, like, teach your children. Even though your fathers and your forefathers before that may have seen what Egypt done, see what God worked, you may not have, neither will your children either. But let them know, well, hey, while we're doing all this, teach them these things. Because remember, they said, well, we wandered in the wilderness a little bit longer than what we're supposed to, because it'd be probably your granddaddy, your great-granddaddy at this time be like, well, we all know what went down. So that's just kind of what is, so the caution against disobedience, things like that. And then he goes in chapter 7, he talks about the chosen people, and we'll just kind of glimpse over that. It says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, seven nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them, which the Lord beforehand says, look, I'm going to take care of these people. In this case, he was using Israel as that way, because God promises, like, hey, they're doing horrible things. I gave them a chance, and they still mess that up. So here's the duty I have for you. You giving the land to you, but here's the deal: we gotta get rid of these folks, and that's what he's more or less put in there too. And also too, we all know well that we're human. We're gonna see these things like we discussed last week. Even though, let's say if they went in and they didn't wipe these people out, which some of them they didn't, they were conned. Some of them they're like, hey, we ain't gonna do this. Like so on and so forth. You may be growing some crop over here, and it's not doing so hot, and then right down the road be your neighbor. His crop's doing great, but he's been there forever as well. His family, he knows how that land works. But he's like, well, you go to this little temple, you pray to this little rain god, sacrifice your kids, you get some good crop. And so on and so forth. That's a little, but that's what some of them probably were doing at the time, doing some other terrible, horrible acts. And they're like, just do this, and then you'll have your crops grow and be blessed with rain. And then Israelites, well, if it works for him, it works for me. And so enough, and that's God's like, well, we're trying to prevent that by getting rid of these people as well, because I want you to focus on me and not get distracted by whatever these other things that these people are worshiping or partaking in. And then you go on so farther down, then we're talking about verse 12 of 7, talking about the blessings of obedience. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Anything anybody learned?
Every time you visit this, that's going to go into the other people.
Mm-hmm.
You would warn them about making a covenant with them, or covenant with marriages with them. Maybe one of them stay Israelites.
Exactly.
You warn them at the time, but they didn't heed to it every time.
No, they do not heed to it every time. And sometimes they were kind of conned into it. We were this great faraway nation, and Israel's like, okay, and come to find out it was the next guys that they was going into, and they're like, well, we just goofed up. And there was always consequences with that when the things like that happen. So verse 12 says, then it shall come to pass, because you listen to these judgments and keep and do them, and the Lord your God will keep them with your covenant, keep with you the covenant and the mercy which he swore to your fathers. Which in this case, has Israel always kept their end of the covenant? No. But guess who always kept his end of the covenant? God did. He always kept it regardless. Even though there was consequences to their actions, like we said. They were held accountable for it. He still kept his end of the covenant. All right, in verse 13 it says, "And he will love you and bless you and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land, your grain and your new wine and your oil, the increase of your cattle and the offsprings of your flock, in the land of which he swore to your fathers to give to you. You shall be blessed above all peoples. There shall not be a male or female barren among you, or among your livestock. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness, and will afflict you with none of the terrible diseases of Egypt which you have known, but will lay them on all those who hate you. Also you shall destroy all the peoples whom the Lord your God delivers over to you. Your eye shall have no pity on them, nor shall you serve their gods, for that will be a snare to you." In this case, he was telling them, hey, be obedient, but remember, do these things I ask you to do so, even though, don't show no pity, don't do this, don't do that. Do what I ask you to. Like we said, does Israel fall through all that? No. Which we can't, because as humans, we do the same thing as well. And today as well, do we try to keep our end of the covenant? We do, but do we fail? Yes. Quite often, more than not. Verse 17 is, "If you should say in your heart, these nations are greater than I, how can I dispose of them? You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember well that the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, and the great trials which your eyes saw, the signs and wonders, the mighty hand, and the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. So shall the Lord your God do to all the people whom you are afraid. Moreover, the Lord your God will send the hornet among them, until those who are left, who hide themselves from you, are destroyed. You shall not be terrified of them, for the Lord your God, the great and awesome God, is among you. And the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you, little by little. You will be unable to destroy them at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. The Lord your God will deliver them over to you, and will inflict a defeat upon them until they are destroyed. And he will deliver their kings into your hand, and you will destroy their name from under heaven. No one shall be able to stand against you until you have destroyed them. You shall burn the carved images of their gods with fire. You should not covet the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it for yourselves, lest you be snared by it, for it is abomination to the Lord your God. Nor shall you bring an abomination to your house, lest you be doomed to destruction like it. And you shall utterly detest it and utterly abhor it, for it is an accursed thing. So here he says, be obedient and do this. And he's being very serious when he's like, it's abomination, these things. He does not want them to partake in any of those things. Don't even keep it. Don't even, oh, we're going to keep this thing in history, because the fact is that they said he knew for a fact that somebody's going to start worshiping that thing where it's all said and done. He said, don't keep it for yourself, destroy it. Melt it down, burn it, whatever you need to do with it. Get rid of that carved image, whatever image it may be, whatever thing they worship, whether it's a stick to a little statue or whatever it may be. Get rid of it, is what he's saying. Okay. And because he said you hate those things, you don't want nothing to do with those things, because you know what, they pull them away from him, and we all know he's a jealous God as well. He made it clear to them beforehand he's jealous of them, or jealous for them, I guess, in this matter, because he chose them, picked them out, did all this thing for them, and yet they go and worship these other images. It's not a good thing. So he warns them over and over and over again. Does anybody have any questions or comments about chapter 7? All right, we'll continue on.
Continues to say, he didn't wound worshiping images, don't get involved with that. Don't get involved with worshiping. Every time. But they didn't listen to him every time.
No, they're not, and there was always consequences. And like he also said before, he says that he's merciful as well. And he says all you have to do is turn back, and you can come back. That's me. He told that to them. Just turn back, and the Lord God he'll bring you back. But he still warns them heavily against these things.
Today too, making images of Jesus and hanging them in the church.
That is true. That is very true. And also,
It's really not a Jesus.
no.
We know what description that was given of him, but somebody made this picture of this.
Well, the story behind that one, and I could be wrong, was supposedly whoever the artist was that did the first initial image of him said he needed the most prettiest man they could find. Apparently, this man was in prison when they found him, and he painted him. That's the story I've heard, but I don't know about anything else. But but yes, we're not to worship these images, and the thing is, some people get caught up in that. People do, and before we realize it or not, then they're worshiping an image and not realize it.
I've seen people kneel down and pray for that picture.
Mm-hmm.
That is an abomination.
That is an abomination. Amen.
Who is the image? Who is the image of God?
We are.
He is.
We are. We were made in His image.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So we are. But yeah, Jesus. Right.
Exactly.
who are we worshiping? The picture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not worshiping God when we worship that picture.
Exactly.
That picture wasn't made in God's image. We were.
Mm-hmm. And to really put it plainly, it's a created image. It's something one of us. I mean, I could draw a stick figure and say, "Hey, this is Jesus." Some people may have actually come to that. And I don't know if there was. I see some news sparking up here and there. It's another, I guess, a false Messiah, and they actually rose up in Israel claiming that they were. And a lot of Christian Israelites are they're like, hold up, this guy don't seem right. So there's been something sparking up over there here in the last recent events, and there's not much coverage on him, but there's here and there on him. So I just try to look in and just kind of watch that for a little bit. So there is, and once again, so that kind of reminded me of that. So I've seen it.
I didn't hear about that.
It's something you might want to look, because there's not much coverage on him, but he pops up here and there. There's some things on social media that these guys, I guess it's on Israel's actual little news thing that they had, and it was somebody living over there, and they were like, this guy's not the real guy, but people were falling over him like crazy. And so there's some things like that going on right now over in Israel. So that just reminded me of that, and I figured I'd throw that out there. Something for y'all to look into, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Does happen. Go to it.
Exactly. And a lot of the things I saw on that social media that they were like, this is not the real guy, but apparently people were falling heads over heels for him. And it was just very interesting. A lot of people were falling to this guy, and it's not a good thing in that matter. Mm-hmm.
Well, they're hungry for the message,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not being fed the right way.
Exactly.
Jesus said that they would send them a delusion that they would believe a strong one and be damned. That's what the scripture says.
I mean, that could be the case right there. So that could be the case right there.
They reject him.
Mm-hmm. That could be very much the case right there. And also, too, and this is something we should probably, and all this what we talked about as well, is that he wants them to teach their children this as well. And we should be doing this as well as teaching our children, our grandchildren, whatever it may be, these very same things, what he's taught them, teaching the word, the message. And this is, I mean, all this here is like literally, like we said, it's a schoolmaster to the new. And he's like, here, tell this to your kids and grandkids. Tell this, pass this down, because the moment you quit doing that, and that's why we have these issues of today. I mean, Lord, yeah, he already said it's going to happen, but he knew what we was going to do. And things like these fake messiahs and these images that people hang up, things like that, is because we may not be teaching. We're dropping the ball in that aspect of we're not teaching like we're supposed to. We're not saying, hey, we're not diving in the Old Testament and the New Testament all at the same time. We're kind of leaving it, not really teaching your children and young children. So always, which I know those probably in here today understand, but I guess those are maybe watching. Just kind of remember to teach this to your children and grandchildren, and let it pass down. Don't ever skip this part of anything.
Jesus said, search the scriptures.
Mhm.
Them they are they that testify of me.
Exactly. Hit that right on the head there, Tommy. So remember that, everybody. All right. Anybody have any other questions or comments? I will continue on to chapter 8. And this is talking about remember the Lord your God. It says, every commandment which I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. And you shall remember the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, allowed you to hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. And he might make you know that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell. These 40 years you should know in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so Lord your God chastens you. In this case, what he's talking about here is like God was taking care of you throughout this whole time. And yes, you were being humbled in the process, but you have to remember, this maybe even humbled him even more. Remember, he was taking care of you this whole time. He was feeding you this manna. He was protecting you from whatever illness that could have befallen you while going through there. I mean, your feet didn't swell, because I know they did a lot of walking. And so on and so forth. And they was testing him. He was I guess honestly, trying to build them up spiritually. So that way, when they go over, they will not immediately just fall to the first group of people that they go into. And just kind of reminders like, God took care of you this whole way. He led you. He humbled you. He knew where he was going the whole time. You didn't. You just followed him. In this case of matters, he said, you're relying on God. In this case, you're relying on his word alone. So remember that, is what he's more or less telling them here. And then it says, verse 6, therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and fear him, for the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, and flow out of valleys and hills, and land of wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, and land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of those hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built beautiful homes and dwell in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold are multiplied, that you and all that you have is multiplied. When your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, in which were fiery serpents and scorpions, a thirsty land, where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rocks, who led you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you, and he might test you, and you do you good in the end. Then you say in your heart, my power and my might and my hand have gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, and that he may establish his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. And then it shall be, if by any means forget the Father your God, allow other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day that you shall surely perish. As the nations which the Lord destroys before you, you shall perish, because you would not be obedient to the voice of the Lord your God. So here he's saying, remember me. Remember who's the one that's got you this point. When you have these homes, you have these land, you have these flocks, and you have this wealth. Remember who you got this from. And he's in this case, it's like, don't think of that. I did this on my own. And in reality, for the last, I guess, for how long you might have been from a little kid all the way up to the point where you are now, where you're being led in the wilderness. God took care of you. He took out your enemies. He gave you this land, which was a lot of it was literally ready for the taking. I mean, they had the olives, they had the vineyards. All they had to do was take care of it, because they didn't grow it. After, at least for the first bit, until the Lord let them learn how to do it. So in this case here, he's talking to them, when you get all these things, don't forget about me. Remember who was the one who brought you here in this place, in this matter. Does anybody have anything in chapter 8? Any questions, comments? All right, we'll continue on in chapter 9. And now we're talking, this is another bit of review here in chapter 9. It says, Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today, and go into dispossessed nations, greater and mightier than you, yourself. Cities great and fortified up to heaven, people great and tall. The descendants of Anakim, whom you know, and of who you heard it is said, who could stand before the descendants of Anak? Therefore, understand today that the Lord your God is he who goes over before you as a consuming fire. He will destroy them and bring them down before you, and you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly, as the Lord has said to you. Do not think in your heart after the Lord your God has cast them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess this land, but it's because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. So here in this case, it says, it's trying to tell them, don't get big-headed because your righteousness. No, it's not that. It's because their wickedness, which he explained before, he's going to get rid of them one way or another because of their wickedness. He did not like seeing or hearing or witnessing what they were doing. I mean, they were doing some pretty horrifying things for the Lord to be like, I'm done. They got to go in this matter. So he said, remember, it's not because of your righteousness that he did make a covenant with them, but also their wickedness. He's got to drive them out because of their wickedness. It is not because of your righteousness, or the uprightness of your heart that you go into possess the land because of wickedness of these nations, that the Lord your God drives them out before you, and that he may fulfill the word which the Lord has swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Therefore understand, the Lord your God is not giving you this land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. In this case, he made it quite clear, it wasn't your righteousness is the reason why we're doing this, because he made a covenant with their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and also with these people's wickedness. He made it quite clear, just, you weren't very righteous, still not very righteous, because you're very stiff-necked people, but because I made a covenant, I want to keep that covenant, but also these people were very wicked and they need to go, in this case of matter. And so he's making it quite clear that before they start walking tall and thinking they're all that, in this case, it's not because of your righteousness, no. Because we've already established that through the previous books. Verse 7 says, remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath and the wickedness from the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you come to this place. You have been rebellious against the Lord. Also in Horeb you provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. When I went up to the mountain and received the tablet of stone, the tablets of the covenant which the Lord made with you, then I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water. The Lord delivered to me 2 tablets of stone, written with the finger of God, and on them were all the words which the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days and 40 nights. He's reminding them, the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone and tablets of the covenant. The Lord said to me, arise and go down quickly from here, for your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have acted corruptly. For they had quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them, and they made themselves a molded image. So he's like, well, that's pretty quick how y'all... I was up there for quite a while, and for me to come back down and see that y'all were already worshiping something different, he said, remember that now. He said, man, y'all may not remember this, but I know for a fact that your forefathers and grandfathers did, because, they're the ones that was partaking in this. He says, verse 13 says, furthermore, the Lord spoke to me, saying, I have seen this people, and indeed they are stiff-necked people. Let me alone, that I may destroy them, and blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make of you a nation mightier and greater than they. And in this case, the Lord still will be keeping his covenant, because Moses is part of the descendants of Abraham and all that. So he still and honestly, he could rise up, like they said, he could rise up the rocks out of the ground and do that. But in this case, he would have kept Moses, and of course, we all know. So I turned down and came from the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire, and 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands. And I looked, and behold, you had sinned against the Lord your God, and had made yourselves a molded calf. You had turned aside quickly the way which the Lord had commanded you. Then I took the 2 tablets and threw them down into my hands and broke them before your eyes. And I fell down before the Lord as of the first 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water, because of your sin which you committed in doing wrongly in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger in hot displeasure with the Lord, in which the Lord was angry with you to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me, and at that time also. And the Lord was very angry with Aaron, who would have destroyed him. So I prayed for Aaron also at the same time. Then I took your sin, the calf which you made, and burned it with the fire, and crushed it and ground it very small until it was fine dust. And I threw its dust into the brook, and that descended from the mountain. Also at Tebra and Manas and Kibroth, I can't even say that, Hatavah, you provoked the Lord to wrath likewise when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I have given you, and you rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God, and you did not believe him, nor obey his voice. You have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. Thus I prostrated myself before the Lord 4 days and 40 nights. I kept prostrating myself, because the Lord had said he would destroy you. Therefore I praised the Lord and said, O God, Lord God, do not destroy your people and your inheritance, from whom you have redeemed through your greatness, and you have brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look on the stubbornness of this people, or their wickedness, or their sin, That's the land from which you brought us, it should say, because the Lord was not able to bring them the land which he promised them, and because he hated them, and he also brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. Yet they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out of your mighty power and by your outstretched arm. So here, he was like, remember all these things you did, and remember I prayed to the Lord and kind of stood on your behalf in this case. And the thing is, you're a very stiff-necked people, so don't think that your righteousness has got you here in this case of matters, what it's really boiling down to. So you're viewed all the times where they were rebellious, and they refused to believe or obey what God told them to do so, and this, that, the other. And then and he told them, like, look, you guys were not very righteous and still not are in this matter, so remember, this is not the reason why you're going into this land. That's what he more or less telling them. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of that?
I mean, if we were so righteous, why would we need Jesus or God? I mean, it's because we are not righteous that God has intervened for us. So it's a lesson we still need to remember. The Bible says our good works are like filthy rags to God. He doesn't need those things. He wants us, but we're not righteous. And until we have Jesus in our salvation, we are far from God and we are wicked. Maybe not in deed, but certainly we're not wholesome in our hearts until we have Jesus in our hearts. And again, if we were righteous, there wouldn't be the need for Jesus.
Exactly.
If our works could do what Jesus' death and resurrection did, why would we need Jesus?
Exactly.
Because our works can't do it. We're not righteous.
Exactly. And
this fleshly level, the only thing righteous about us is without Christ forgiveness. And that is our hope of glory. So we are not perfect. We cannot be perfect. That's one reason that when we leave this world, we shed this body. We leave it behind. Because it cannot inherit what we're in.
Exactly. It's always fighting with the spirit in this case of matter. And then this is, I guess, we could like to use this example of, like you said, we're not righteous. Could we ever strive to that? No, because we'll always fall short in that case of matter. Does that mean we shouldn't strive for it? No, we should continue to strive for that. But like you said, with this flesh, we will never really truly accomplish that until we pass on in this case of matter.
Even in the law and all the things in that, he tells us if it hadn't been perfect, it could have been what it could have saved us. We don't need to do away with it. But it wasn't. And it comes to a point where he needed to do something different. We couldn't be perfect. They couldn't be perfect. They couldn't live up to the law. They said, I'll send my son. And he will be your go-between, if you will. And he will be that one that will speak to God for us. And he said, you gotta believe in me. Because that's what's going on.
And that's what, honestly, he's been saying throughout this whole thing, is to believe in him, to trust in him, and be obedient to his word. I mean, that's all really, if you just really want to piece it out in just a few pieces, other than the message of Christ, I mean, just be obedient, believe in him, and trust him in this case of matter. That's all he really asked us this whole time. And do we do that? No. Did they really do that? No. We should. We fall short, and that's why we go to Christ, so that we could accomplish some of those things.
Right. He made a covenant with Israel. Okay. And that covenant was a fleshly covenant. Circumcision that showed who they were. So he made a covenant really with them, but also he had given them the law, and they were to live by that law. So what did he do? Jesus said he came to fulfill that.
Not to do away with it.
And then he has a new covenant, and it was prophesied that there would be a new covenant, and that basically Christ would be the head of that new covenant. He would come. He would be our supreme sacrifice. No need for other sacrifice and no need for the law. We're going to live under grace, but there's going to be some rules that he gave commandments too.
Mm-hmm.
One was you have to believe who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And he told him in John chapter 14, he said, you believe in God, believe also in me. Now, the Israelites from the old, there was no level that was just God.
Mm-hmm.
And he's bringing a new covenant where the Son is going to be in charge of everything, and God is giving him all power. They had a hard time dealing with that. So he brought Paul along to preach the new covenant to them also, and
Mm-hmm.
to get them to understand this, that Christ had brought a new covenant, a covenant of grace. To get them to understand that. We're still trying to get people to understand it. Jesus Christ is the way, truth, and life. He's the only way.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to get to heaven without him.
Amen. That is true. You cannot get to heaven without him. And he is the way and the truth and life. No one gets to the Father except through him. In that case of matter. That is very true. Anybody else? Alright, we'll continue on in chapter 10. What time is it, by the way? Is that clock right back there? Is that clock right back there? Okay. It's close. Okay. Well, we'll continue on. I still got a little bit of time left. And it says, chapter 10, verse 1, it says, At the time the Lord said to me, Hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain, and make yourself an ark of wood. And I will write on the tablets of the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood, hewed 2 stone tablets like the first, and went up the mountain having the 2 tablets in my hand, and he wrote on the tablets according to the first writing of the 10 commandments the Lord has spoken to you in the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them to me. And I turned down and came down from the ark, or from the mountain, and put the tablets in the ark which I made. And there they are just as the Lord commanded me. And then verse 6 is, Now the children of Israel journeyed from the wells of Ben Jachem to Marasah, where Aaron died and where he was buried. And Eleazar, his son, ministered as priest in his stead. From there they journeyed from Gudgodan, and from Gudgodan to Jehobath, the land of rivers of water. At the time the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister to him, and to bless his name to this day. Therefore Levi has no portion nor inheritance with his brethren, and the Lord is his inheritance, just as the Lord your God can promised him. So in this case, he's reminding them, it's like, remember, the Levites are not going to have any sort of land, just the few cities, or some of the cities that he's given them, and a little bit of land that's around them. In this case of matter, they're not, the only true inheritance they have is serving the Lord, our God. In this case of matter, they're going to focus on him. They were separated for him, so they could do the works that he needs them to do. And in this case, minister, to teach, and to do other priestly matters as well, and to remember the laws as well. And so in that case of matter, so they were set aside, their inheritance is God in this case of matter. Is anybody have questions or comments?
Where did the first table come from? The 10 commandments were on those.
Well, they came from God. The first ones did.
Where did the second one come from?
Well, Moses had to put those together, but God did write on those as well.
He got the table, so God had to write the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
But God didn't need anybody involved in the first one.
No.
But he did in the second.
Mm-hmm.
Because Moses needed to understand we do too.
Mm-hmm.
God has all power. He knew all things. When he did the first one, he wrote it. He got the table. He wrote it. He gave him Moses.
Mm-hmm.
But the second one, he said, you get to you do that. You get to the table and bring them to me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to bring our things to him.
Mm-hmm.
We got all things perfect. But when we are in trouble, he said, bring them to me.
Amen. It's kind of well, I guess one of those instances where I guess Moses may not appreciate them as much because the Lord already had made him give them to him. Then this time he had to put them, at least cut these out and hew them out and go. And we may think twice before he breaks these ones. I think is maybe the lesson on this one is like, don't break your tablets that I give you, okay? Because if not, you're going to make them again, and you'll have to break them in this case of matter. So I think that's part of the lesson on that one as well. So verse 10 is, as at the first time I stayed in the mountain 4 days and 40 nights, the Lord also heard me at that time, and the Lord chose not to destroy you. And the Lord said to me, arise, bring your journey before the people, that they may go in and possess the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. And then verse 12, it says, for now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I've commanded you. Hold on, let me turn my page. Commanded you today for your good, or for your good. Indeed, indeed, heaven and the highest heavens before to the Lord your God, or belong to the Lord your God. Also the earth, which with all that it has in it, the Lord delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their descendants after them, you above all peoples, as it is this day. Therefore, circumcise the foreskins of your heart, and be stiff-necked no longer. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He administers justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and clothing. Therefore love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him, and to him you shall hold fast and take oaths in his name. He is your praise, and he is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to went down to Egypt with 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of heaven in multitude. So like throughout this whole thing, really, he just says, remember your commandments, remember what God has told you and instructed you to do. So remember these things, and do these things that he tells you, and just remember that he's the one true God, the awesome, powerful, mighty. He will do all these things, and in this case of matter, he's telling them, remember these things in this case of matter. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? We could get started in 11, and we'll go from there. And then it says, so this is beloved and obedience rewarded. Therefore you shall, chapter 11, verse 1, therefore you shall love the Lord your God and keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments always. Know that I do not speak with your children who have not known and who have not seen the chastening of the Lord your God, his greatness, and his mighty hand, his outstretched arm, his signs, his acts, which he did in the midst of Egypt, to Pharaoh king of Egypt, and to all his land. What did he to the army of Egypt, to their horses and their chariots? How he made the waters of the Red Sea overflow them as they pursued you, and how the Lord has destroyed them to this day. What he did for you in the wilderness until you came to this place, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the son of Reuben, how the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, their household, their tents, and their substance that was in their possession, in the midst of all Israel. But your eyes have seen every great act of the Lord which he did. Therefore you shall keep every commandment which I commanded you today, and that you may be strong and go in and possess the land which you cross over to possess, and that you may prolong your days in the land which the Father swore to give your fathers, and to them their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the land which you go to possess is not like the land of Egypt, for which you have come, where you sowed your seed and watered it by foot as a vegetable garden. But the land which you cross over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water from the rain of heaven, a land to which the Lord your God cares. The eyes of the Lord your God is always on it, from the beginning of the year to the very end of the year. And it shall be that if you earnestly obey my commandments, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will give you the rain for your land in its season, the early rain, the latter rain, that you may gather in your grain, your new wine, your oil, and I will send grass in the fields for your livestock, that you may eat and be filled. Take heed to yourselves, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside to serve other gods and worship them, lest the Lord's anger be aroused against you, and he shall shut up the heavens so that there will be no rain, and the land yield no produce, and you shall perish quickly from the land which the Lord is given you. In this case of matter, it's almost like a precursor, because when Elijah first came in on the scene, guess what the land was doing? they were worshiping other gods, and guess what happened? They were in a drought. In this case or matter. So here he's telling them, like, serve me and these things will come. But he says, when you quit serving me and you start doing these things, well, like I've been saying for the last little bit, is that there's consequences to these actions. They're going to be held accountable, because he says, remember, if you made this covenant with me, you're going to keep these things. I will keep my covenant, but if you don't do what this is, these things are going to happen. You're not going to get what you want. You're going to suffer on account of it. In this case of matter, until you come back to me, because here he's telling them, he's really warning them, says, don't turn aside to these other idols, to worship these other things, because they're an abomination to him. And he made it quite clear to them that he does not want them to partake in any of those things. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we wrap this up?
That was an interesting distinction between the land in Egypt and the land in Canaan. The notes here say that Egypt, the fertility came from the Nile River, so they were not dependent upon God. Canaan, the fertility came from the rains from heaven. So there was this distinction between how the lands were different, prosperous.
And still, the Lord still had control of that river, because he turned it into blood. He did different things like that, so he still had control. But I guess
God could have left them in Egypt, but would they have been dependent on him like they were in Canaan with the rains?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. They would be more, I guess, self-sufficient in that case or matter. So in this case, he's like, look, I'll provide you all these things. I'll take care of you, but you have to follow me. And have they always done that? No. And maybe we should take heed. We have the same promise today, and we should take heed of that as well. Anybody else have any questions or comments? All right. Well,